Ladies and gentlemen, my name's Paul. Hope you're having an amazing day. Nvidia's CES conference has finally been and gone. And honestly, I think that they pretty much nailed it. At least when it comes to the pricing. There's a lot of stuff to discuss here, including of course the specifications of the card, what the real performance will be if you don't take the multi-frame generation into account, and also want to touch on AMD's no-show of the RDNA 4 graphics cards. We're going to get into all of that, plus some more stuff after this quick message from the sponsor of the video. If you're running a copy of Windows 10 which isn't activated, of course, not only do you have to worry about the missing customization options, but there's also that annoying Windows desktop watermark reminding you to activate. Today's video is sponsored by WhoKeys.com, and they have an excellent price on Windows 10 Professional as well as Home keys. Yeah, and they also of course sell games. I've bought a few Windows 10 keys with my own personal account to test everything was legit and worked in preparation for this sponsored video. You can pick up one of their keys for 25% off using the coupon code RGT in the checkout. There's links to their website in the video description. Also, if you're building a few systems, there's bundles available too. Again, you can check out WhoKeys.com and use the coupon code RGT for 25% off the listed Windows 10 key prices. So before we get into the actual performance metrics and all of that, let's just very briefly go over the specifications of the GPU. So Nvidia did announce the 5090, the 5080, the 5070 Ti, and finally the 5070. And they have provided us some overview of these specifications. Basically speaking, the specs which did leak are pretty much bang on. For example, the RTX 5090 sports 21,760 CUDA cores. We also have the clock frequency here with the boost clock, at least from Nvidia, stated to be 2.41 gigahertz. Although, of course, when it comes to the boost frequency of GPUs, it's very difficult to know exactly what it's going to hit. But yeah, that is actually a little slower, to be honest with you guys, than what I had imagined. But regardless, clock frequency isn't necessarily a determining factor of performance, and this particular card, the 5090, is going to be sucking down 575 watts. Regardless of which, the GPU is pretty damn slim. It's essentially a 2-slot design, and I personally think it looks pretty sleek. The Founders Edition is even going to be able to fit into small form factor systems. Now let's talk about the prices, because, well, the prices are by far the fact that I think that everyone was really concerned about. Now the 5090 is, I'm going to round up the prices here, $2,000 US. The 5080 is $1,000 US, the 5070 Ti is $750 US, and the 5070 is $550 US. Now, I have to say that the 5090 is about on the ballpark that I'd expected. There were all of these leaks at like ridiculous MSRPs of like, you know, $2,500 and $3,000. And I put out videos and said, guys, I just don't believe it. I think that's way too much money. With that said, of course, MSRP and what you can actually buy these things for retail, I'm sure there are going to be custom cards, particularly if scalpers get involved, that mean the prices are going to whoop. But yeah, for the MSRP, there was just no way in hell $3,000 US was logical, at least to me. However, I do feel like the 5080 and the price of $1,000 US is actually a little cheaper than what I'd expected. I kind of expected around $1,100, $1,200. So yeah, that's pretty good. It's obviously not as cheap as I'd hoped. I'd hoped it would be like $899 US, but I think $1,000 for one of these cards is actually pretty reasonable, and I also think that the price that they're asking for the 5070 is also pretty damn good as well. It means that there's going to be a lot of pressure on the used market for RTX 30 and RTX 40 cards, but I also wouldn't be surprised if this means AMD are going to have to rethink their strategy a little bit, and we'll get more into that in just a moment. Now, in a future video, I will be more extensively covering multi-frame generation and DLSS 4 and exactly what it does. I didn't want to eat up a ton of this video because I know some people just want the basics of, you know, what I think of the cards themselves. So in a future video, I'll go over this stuff perhaps, but just in this video, basically, DLSS 4 is going to have a new feature, which is going to be multi-frame generation. Now, with the RTX 40 cards, of course, DLSS 3 introduced, well, frame generation, and this would essentially allow the insertion of a single generated frame And obviously that would boost performance. However, Nvidia have essentially gone back to the drawing board, and now it can insert 3 of these frames and is doing a bunch of technical jiggery pokery. Again, I'm going to keep a lot of the really technical stuff out of this video because I don't want to eat up a ton of time explaining how the new pipeline works. There are a couple of videos from Nvidia themselves, so I will try to remember to link those in the video description if you want an overview of that. But supposedly, it's going to do a very good job and help to minimize latency. Now, at the end of the day, I can only go with Nvidia's marketing spiel here. This is going to be something that reviewers and, of course, yourselves are going to have to test to really figure out how this is going to work in terms of latency. It's going to be very interesting to try this out on higher frame rate games, yes, but also lower FPS experiences. Looking at the performance numbers that Nvidia have released, and demos of, for example, Alan Wake 2 and other games, it looks really cool in theory. But again, the proof isn't just in a YouTube video. At the end of the day, it's actually someone playing a game, because ultimately games are not movies. You have to actually interact with them. You can kind of be like, this feels a bit, well, let's just say you could feel latency. Let's just be honest. Like, a tiny bit of latency, I'm not super sensitive with personally. Again, it could be the type of games that I'm playing, but when it starts to really get bad, it's like, dude, this is not good. So it's going to be very interesting to see how this plays out in the real world. So now let's actually look at those performance graphs. I think the first one to begin with is the RTX 5090 versus the 4090. Now, you'll notice here that there are quite a number of games. We have Black Myth Wukong, Alan Wake 2, Cyberpunk, A Plague Tale Requiem, and Far Cry 6. Now, before we get into the actual performance, first of all, there are no exact numbers here, so we can't actually know the exact frame rates, but let's have a quick read of the little caveats at the bottom. 4K max settings, DLSS SR performance, and DLSS RR on 40 series and 50 series. Frame gen on 40, MFG with the 4X mode on 50 series cards. A Plague Tale Requiem only supports DLSS 3, and then they talk about a bunch of stuff with Flux Dev FP, but you know, we're not talking about generative AI here. Let's just focus on games for our sanity. Now, Far Cry 6, and please correct me if I'm wrong, guys, but to my knowledge anyway, it doesn't support DLSS. Now, you can see here the graph, the green, which is obviously representing the RTX 5090, is not that much higher. I've basically done a little bit of eyeballing. I've also run this by ChatGPT, and it's, roughly speaking, around 30% higher. Now, obviously, and it's not exact number, it could be like 28%, could be around 32%, but roughly from what I can see, it's around the 30-ish% mark. Now, the caveat here, despite the CPU that they're allegedly using, Far Cry is very, Far Cry 6, at least from when I last tested the game, is very CPU bound. Even at 4K, you could start running into some issues. So I wouldn't be surprised, honestly, if potentially this could be a little bit higher if we have a CPU, you know, in a couple of years' time, a couple of generations' time, that's even faster than what they're using here. But ultimately, we can't make predictions, so we can say it's roughly in, you know, Far Cry anyway, around that. A Plague Tale Requiem, however, is a little higher. Again, using the 4090 as baseline. A Plague Tale Requiem, I mean, again, I've asked ChatGPT, and I'm eyeballing it. It looks around 35 to 40% faster. Now, what they're basically doing with Plague Tale Requiem, it's using DLSS frame generation, but it's only generating a single frame on both the 5090 and the 4090. So what this basically means is that they are essentially on a level playing field in that they are both using fake frames. So it's architectural improvements here. So because Plague Tale is quite heavy, at least to my, from what I remember anyway, on the, what's the word I'm looking for? Ray tracing. I think that's why we're seeing a smaller, a slightly larger performance uplift. It looks like it's around maybe 30 to 35, excuse me, to 40% improvement. So that's pretty damn good. I would say probably erring on around the 40% mark. Now, when it comes to, say, Cyberpunk and Alan Wake 2, and Nvidia have also provided footage of this, which is going to be on screen, I don't really need to tell you guys that the performance uplift is absolutely massive. And this means that, at least in theory, games are going to be very playable at super high refresh rates. For your FYI, I also looked through the other graphs as well, and while the exact uplift between the equivalent 40 card and the equivalent 50 card does vary just a little bit, ultimately speaking, it seems pretty consistent. So around 25 to 30% in raster, it seems like, depending, I'm sure, on different games, whether you're CPU bound and all of the other caveats that we have to throw in. There's possibilities, for example, driver updates could improve things, custom AIB models could clock higher, whatever. We can't make those predictions. So based on the slides, around 25%. And as for ray tracing, it's a little bit higher. Obviously, they're using new, RT cores and all of that jazz. And when you take into account the new ray tracing features, DLSS features, then things get really cool. Now, what I will also say, and I really want to give Nvidia credit here, while the multi-frame generation, I can't tell you guys how good it is. I suspect it's going to be decent, but I don't know. At the end of the day, I have not tested the cards out myself, so I don't know. Is it better than previous generations? I'm hopeful, and that's all I can say. However, basically, the improvements for DLSS outside of the multi-frame generation, such as ray tracing reconstruction, and also the single frame generation, such as using improvements in performance as well as reducing memory, those are going to be backported, and this is wonderful news for RTX 20 owners. I'm actually doing some testing at the moment. I'm buggering around. That's actually why in the background here you can see like all this stuff, because I'm doing some really tests. I'm doing like a couple of different projects. And this is going to be really wonderful news for RTX 2080 owners, for example, or if you're running an RTX 30 card, because ultimately DLSS is going to be part and parcel on upscaling as a general statement of the next generation of graphics. Now, I know I'm throwing a lot at you guys here, because I'm trying to get through this like wham, 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 wham. And I don't want to spend like super long going into the architectural stuff. Again, I will cover this more exhaustively in another video, especially with DLSS as information starts to come out and we start perhaps getting some interviews and so on. So I want to focus this on just my general feeling of the cards. I would say, if you've got the money, obviously buy what the hell you want, right? It's like, dude, if you're a millionaire, buy what the hell you want, and also buy me a card as well, please. I'm joking. But yeah, like if you're rich and you can afford it, it doesn't matter. You've got the money, just buy your new toy. But most users obviously aren't like that. Now, my personal opinion is that if you are someone who's rocking, let's say an RTX 4080 or a 4090, just for example, and you're okay, like you're like, I'm happy. It's not like suddenly your current card is not gonna run those games. And again, these improvements in DLSS, such as image quality and so on, they're going to be working on an RTX 30 or RTX 40 card. So with multi-frame generation, it's really that drives you to upgrade. And obviously not all games are going to feature this. I think there was something like 70 or 80 games, but that's from memory. The number could be slightly different, which is going to feature this. And basically you can use the Nvidia app to change the DLSS mode, or rather the multi-frame generation mode, and I think that's pretty cool. So my personal opinion is, like, if you're running an RTX 4090, for example, and a lot of games you are running, you're hitting high enough frames a second, or you don't really care that much about DLSS, like multi-frame generation. I mean, to be honest, guys, look, if you're running a game and you're getting, like, let's say you're running 120 hertz TV, and you're getting, let's just hypothetically say, between 90 and 130 FPS on most games that you're playing with an RTX 4090, is it going to be beneficial to upgrade? Well, maybe you could run slightly higher quality settings with DLSS and blah, 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 but it's also a lot of money to throw down. Maybe I would sit on the fence and wait for perhaps an RTX refresh, which is inevitably going to happen. With that said, if you're running an older card, it becomes a lot bigger. Like if you're running, let's say, a GTX 1080, obviously now you're getting to that point where mesh shaders starting to be incorporated into games. I think Final Fantasy Rebirth? I think it's Rebirth requires shader model 6.6. So that means like you need an RTX 20 or later card. So ultimately, I think GPUs, again, like the 5070 and even the 5080 are very, very tempting at that price. Now, There is, of course, the fact that the 5080 is only using 16 gigabytes of memory, and I do think that's a little disappointing. I've heard a lot of theories as to why Nvidia are doing this. One is just the fact that the 5080, the 3 gigabyte modules are only being produced by one vendor. I think it's Samsung. Don't quote me on that. I think it's Samsung. I forgot to make a note of it because I'm an idiot. But anyway, yeah. So I think it's Samsung, and apparently they're quite rare at the moment. So they're using them for the 5080 mobile chips, which I don't know. So it could be that. It could be that they're saving up for the 5080 refresh, which inevitably is going to be like the 5080 Super or something like that. Or another theory that I've heard is it's so that people don't gobble them up for AI. I honestly don't know what's true. I've had multiple theories from multiple different people. I genuinely don't know what's true. 16 gigabytes I think is probably going to be okay for most users with a 5080. However, will a 5080 outperform a 4090 across the vast majority of games? I don't know. And so it's going to be interesting to me to see what happens in the used market with a 4090 and folks deciding, do I go with a 5080 and 24 gigabytes of memory, or do I stick with the, it's going to be very interesting. So I do think that the price of the 5080 and the 5070 are really, really good. And I want to get into actually AMD for a moment. Now, there were 5 slides. Oh, I was doing that. Apparently, I can't count. It's been one of those days. So five slides that AMD basically distributed to members of the press. And this is prior to CES. And by the way, just so we're clear, this is on the RX 9000 series announcement stuff. And they distributed them, and they basically implied heavily, to my knowledge anyway, that there were going to be, announcements at CES, and then nothing happened. Now, since then, AMD have essentially said that they didn't feel that they had enough time. I think it was Hardware Canucks who said this, but it's either Hardware Canucks or Hardware Unboxed. I think it was Canucks. And they basically were told something like, oh, it's because we didn't have enough time in our presentation. Guys, you mentioned the word AI so many times, it's AI. Did you know that our new systems are AI? Oh, and also AI. Did you know that Dell also loves AI? Oh, our new APUs, they're great at AI. I was like, oh my god. I was getting PTSD by the time the freaking conference was over. Now, don't get me wrong. I understand from a business perspective, AI is the thing that, makes shareholders' panties wet. But, come on, man. I don't believe that reason. I'm sorry. I'm just going to be blunt. I love AMD. I do. I love AMD. I think it's incredibly... I love all the 3 companies, like Intel, AMD, and Nvidia. I think it's incredibly important for our ecosystem. This is one of the reasons I've been banging on about Intel, getting into discrete graphics, and why I've been so... I've been advocating Battlemage. Oh, by the way, one of the big things of CES Intel conferences is they're confirmed that they're not getting out of discrete graphics. That was actually a really big thing. Anyway, my point is, all 3 companies need to be as competitive to one another as possible. And I love AMD. I love their products. I love their processors. And, but I just don't believe that reason. If I had to stick to a 45-minute conference, as far as I remember, the live stream was 42 minutes, right? Even if, let's hypothetically say that by the time they had to count the people getting on and off stage for a couple of extra minutes, so let's say they couldn't have shaved down the conference, let's say it was the packed 45 minutes. They could have shaved that thing down just 3 to 4 minutes of some of the AI talk to talk just briefly about the graphics, because it seems so disconnected and disjointed. It was like, you had Matt Booty from Microsoft essentially say, oh, FSR 4 is in Call of Duty, and that was quite early in the conference, and then it was nothing. And again, it wouldn't have even been such a big deal, but they'd already announced this stuff to the press, and you had poor AIBs like Power Color, who were like, oh yeah, watch our conference, guys. Oh, sorry, watch AMD's conference, guys. There's going to be some big announcements. I don't mean to rag on AMD. This is not like AMD sucks as Nvidia is the bestest. I do genuinely think RDNA 4, assuming it's priced correctly, is going to be a really good architecture. And at the end of the day, until any of these cards, like the RTX 5090, could suck, until it's actually in our hands, just take anything with a pinch of salt. But I was really disappointed. I guess we'll have to wait and see how all of this shapes up. Let me know your thoughts on this. I think so far, though, my genuine opinion is that the 5080 is a very good price compared to what Nvidia could have charged. Isn't as good as what I'd hoped. Well, no, I'd have liked them to charge like $600, but you know, realistically, 1,000 is cheaper. I think it was about as cheap as I was realistically expecting. The RTX 5090, I think it was about as high as my estimates. So I'd predicted like 1,800 to 2,000 US dollars, and again it's $2,000. So, I'm not surprised, but I'm a little disappointed with the 5090's price, but I'm not like terribly disappointed. The rest of the SKUs I'm really quite happy with, and I think Nvidia did really well with this conference. This is one of those conferences of Nvidia and the announcements of Nvidia that I don't think you even need to buy an RTX 50 product to be happy, because like it's like, dude, if you're happy to stick on your 3080, for example, that is awesome because you're still going to be getting these DLSS improvements. Oh no, we'll have to wait and see. At the end of the day, I'm gonna remain somewhat pessimistic on the improvements of the frame generation until I actually physically can touch it. I think the raster performance improvements on a per generation basis, so for example the 4090 versus the 5090, 30%, it's a little low. I would have loved for them to have cranked the clock frequency higher maybe, and it's going to be interesting to see what you can do if you are willing to go to like 650 watts, assuming you're even able to do that. Like if you can mod the BIOS or what have you, it's going to be interesting to see what you can actually get out of it once overclocking starts. Realistically, I don't think you're going to be pushing these things to like, you know, 4 gigahertz, let's just be honest, but who knows. But I would have loved to have seen the 40% raster and around 50% in ray tracing. But it doesn't look like that's going to happen, at least based on these numbers. And ultimately, that's the thing. We are using Nvidia's numbers. Let me know your thoughts and opinions on this one, guys. I'm left, I guess, my final thoughts on this, and you can cut out the video at this point. My final thoughts on this is that Nvidia's conference was about as good as I had imagined it would be, based on the competitive landscape that they were facing. As for AMD, I think the products they announced, the 9950X3D, looks phenomenal. Strix Point Halo, or actually the entirety of the APUs look really good. I'm just very disappointed there was no RDNA 4 stuff. Hopefully that will come pretty soon. And I do think in the long term, the collaboration with Sony on the PS5 Pro and the AI initiative that they're working on, you know, with upscaling and neural networks for games, because I've actually been wanting to talk about that, you know, collaboration and the whole Mark Cerny thing, but it's like I was literally waiting, because I was even starting a script. I was like, dude, what am I doing? Like I got maybe halfway through the script and I said to myself, dude, what are you doing? Like AMD's conference is soon, just wait and they'll probably announce some more stuff. Smack round my face. Anyway, I think that's it for this video. Let me know your thoughts and opinions, guys. Take care of yourselves. Have a great day. Bye for now.